Yeah, so today we're hosting a really special AMA with philosopher Michael Huemer at the University of Colorado Boulder. He's a well-established philosopher with a hefty amount of publications in many different topics, including free will, epistemology, metaethics, and applied ethics. Notably, he recently published a book called The Dialogues on Ethical Vegetarianism, which is a broad overview in a lay accessible format of the contemporary arguments for and against vegetarianism and veganism. Um, he's also argued in other formats and places for ethical veganism, as well as other animal rights issues, including, notably, within the libertarian space, which, at least to my reading, is something that we don't get very often here. Usually, we see arguments that are contra the vegan position from the libertarian and anarcho-capitalist side, but Michael Huemer has sort of taken on that space head on, publishing within Reason magazine and other spaces against notable other libertarians like Brian Kaplan, and has provoked quite a good bit of discourse in there. So we actually did a reading the other day of those topics, and I think explored some of Huemer's more interesting and controversial positions, as well as we did some interesting reading of the dialogues as well. Hopefully people will have generated some questions from those readings, and we'll be able to generate some questions from what they hear today. Yeah, we're really, really excited to talk to you, Michael, and let's get going.
All right. Trying to figure out how to invite on my phone. Do you know how to invite people up, Bryn? I thought I did, but it's not working.
They have been invited. Michael Huemer, on the top, you should see a green bar. You can join the stage.
Okay. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're clear.
Okay, great. I successfully joined the stage. Yeah, okay, so anyway, I guess Pake said that I should say something about introducing myself. So I'm
You want?
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, so as you know, I'm a professor of philosophy at the University of Colorado. I have like 8 books and 70 academic articles, something like that. You can find more of my stuff on my website, which is owl232.net. And I have a blog called Fake News, FAKENOUS.net. And yeah, and I wrote a book defending veganism called Dialogues on Ethical Vegetarianism, which I think is why I'm here.
Yeah. Perfect. That's great. Okay, so we are gonna have to figure out why I'm not being able to invite people on stage. Is it a perms thing, Dantes?
Oh, I can give the perms. I thought they were.
That'd be helpful.
Yeah, sure. Also, welcome. Glad to have you on. It's great. Great pleasure. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, I want to apologize for missing the event yesterday, because I forgot. Yeah, I have the lamest excuse, but that's what happened.
Actually seems to have worked out because I think we have more people here today. Today we're looking at like 100 people joining, and yesterday we only had about 50 or so. So yeah. I think we got double the turnout because of it, but it works out in the end.
All right.
Yeah. So, Dantes, if you want to, you're still giving me the perms. If you want to get Rick up here.
Yeah. Well set.
Oh, so I have them now?
Yeah, you should. Oh, you don't have the perms?
Yeah, when I click on people, the only thing it says in a voice call, listen in. There's nothing to like add to them. I'm also on my phone though. I could switch my phone.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, let me quickly fix that. Who do you want me to bring up?
Oh, Richt. R-I. What's the next word?
Rick, if you could actually raise your hand, and then we will bring you up.
Oh, I see now. I can I can move people. All right. Perfect.
Hello? Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Hey.
Great. Okay. Hello, Professor Huemer. I'd just like to begin by saying I'm very honored to be able to meet you. I'm a huge fan of your work on ethics, veganism, epistemology, and political philosophy. So I would just like to ask you about two questions that I've been thinking about regarding metaethics. So the first is, so in your papers, you often use the companions of guilt argument between ethical norms and epistemic norms, which like implies the existence of categorical norms. Now, from my understanding, a categorical norm in epistemology would be something like you should want probable belief or you should want truth. But is there any way to assert that we should hold a certain value? Because I personally always understood should to mean that we have reason to do something in the first place. So, like, you should do X means you have most reason to do X. So, is there anything like that we should? Is there any I guess is there any like reason to believe we should hold a like probable belief or we should seek truth in the first place?
Yeah. I mean, so the reason why you should satisfy the principles of probability has to do with truth. So, like, there are arguments. Very roughly speaking, there are arguments to the effect that your beliefs need to be probabilistically coherent if you value truth, right? So then that turns to your other question, like, is there a reason why we should value truth? Yeah, the reason is that truth is good.
Right. That's just an intuition, just a self-evident intuition.
Yeah, it's intrinsically good. I mean, there are also instrumental reasons, but I think like true belief is valuable even for impractical propositions. Right, yeah.
Yeah. So, if I may ask, when you say good here, like what exactly are you referring to? Is it like when Moore says good, like some kind of non-natural property, or is it just like synonymous with something?
Yeah, so so in ethical intuitionism, I basically agree with G.E. Moore that you can't define good.
Okay.
Yeah, if somebody actually didn't know what it meant, and you want to explain it, you would just give examples of things that are good.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah. Okay, thanks. I also have a second question, and that's directly regarding like intuitionism and ethics. So, you often state that we can use our intuitions to sense like self-evident truths and morality, but it seems to me at least that our intuitions seem to differ in relation to ethics far more than they do in other fields. Like, for example, in mathematics or geometry, we all have the shared intuition that the shortest distance between any two lines is a straight path. But we do not have shared intuitions about things like whether or not animal suffering matter. Like, I know a lot of people who just don't care about killing animals or animal suffering. It's not intuitively bad to them. Or even like, for example, recently I saw one of your talks where you gave the violinist thought experiment, like as an analogy to abortion. But I've asked a lot of people, like, do you think the person has an obligation to stay connected? And they always have a varying answer. Other examples also include like whether or not it would be morally acceptable to kill another person to survive in a life or death situation. Or, for example, like the trolley problem. People tend to have differing answers, and they'll also have differing answers over the variation regarding if you're pushing someone over the tracks versus if you're just switching the track, etc. So it seems to me, at least, that there's a lot more varying intuition in ethical truth rather than like mathematical truth or like logical truth. So how do we know like whose intuition we should trust? Like, how do we filter between the different intuitions?
Yeah, good. So, I mean, your first example was about animal welfare, and that. So, like a lot of people appear to they appear to not intuit that animal welfare matters, and they appear to have the initial just sense that only humans matter. But that's why you wouldn't like if you're trying to reason with someone about animal ethics, you wouldn't just say, "Oh yeah, intuitively, animal welfare matters." What you would do is appeal to something else that they probably do agree about. So, like, there's a very widely accepted principle in ethics, the supervenience of value properties, which is that if there's an evaluative difference between two things, and there has to be some descriptive difference that explained it. In fact, you can just presuppose this without actually stating it, and most people just don't, just completely go along with it and don't like have any problem. So, you just ask the person like what they think the relevant difference is between humans and animals, right? And then they say something like, well, humans are more intelligent than animals. Then you're like, okay, so let's say you have a mentally disabled infant, right? Which could be less intelligent than a typical animal. And then you're like, okay, so do you think that it would be okay to like torture and then kill the infant for like trivial reasons? And then most people will just have the intuitive reaction that that would not be okay. Right. So the thing to do when there's this disagreement is to try to appeal to other intuitions where you don't disagree.
I mean, if I may add, by the way, I actually, I think I included this in the prior version of my question, but I left it out. I did also want to bring up, because that's basically the marginal cases argument, right? And I've used that, and I've used some of his alternatives. But it also seems to me that the overwhelming majority of humans, like across like most cultures, also have a speciesist intuition. Like it does, like if you talk to most people and if you pry into their value system enough, it doesn't seem that sentience or consciousness or the capacity to suffer is the only thing that they value. It seems like they also usually value humanity, or like, looking like a human, right? Like,
Yeah.
so
Well,
is that something we just have to say, oh, that's just like, your like survival instinct or like human anthropocentric bias?
yeah. I
And if
mean,
so, like, how do we prove that that's wrong, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, this might be true about like people's, as a remark about people's emotional reactions, right? Like
yeah.
their emotional reactions are influenced by what something looks like. So if it looks human, then they feel sympathy. But if you ask people to think about it intellectually, I think very few people are going to say, yeah, like the visible appearance is morally important, right?
Yeah.
Like what if I get some plastic surgery so that I don't look human anymore? Then will it be okay to torture me? And I think almost everyone would agree that the answer is no, because, it doesn't matter what I look like.
Right. Okay.
And yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
That
like,
makes sense.
part of what you want to do is sort of like some of the intuitive reactions that people have are biases, right? And like you want to try to identify this, right? So, this is a thing that you can do, like think about, well, like do you actually think that this thing matters morally? And then if we can show that your intuitive reactions are influenced by this thing that you think is morally irrelevant, then we have reason to discount that.
Okay. That makes sense. Thank you so much for that.
Yep.
Extremely. It's great to meet you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you, Riddick. I don't know if I have to. Oh, there you go. All right. So the next question, I think we're just gonna read out, and that is from Higsby. Do you draw the line at kingdom? If so, or
What?
sorry. Hold on. It's I think it's about the animal kingdom specifically. Do you draw the line at the animal kingdom? If so, is there any particular trait or set of traits you look for when defining veganism?
Oh, yeah. So no, I mean, like kingdom membership doesn't matter. What matters is sentience or something like this, like whether something can have experiences that are positive or negative. And
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, so there are like some creatures that are animals, like according to biological classification, but are non-sentient. Like, they might not have a central nervous system, so then you could be pretty confident that they're non-sentient. On the other hand, if there were a non-animal that was sentient, then it would have moral status. So, I mean, I don't know of any, right? But maybe like maybe
Mm-hmm.
we'll develop artificial intelligence that will someday be conscious, and then it will have rights.
All right. Fantastic. So now we're gonna have Zufang up here, and they have a couple questions for you. Zufang, are you here? Oh, they messaged me. I'm here. Yeah. Did you get the? I invited you to speak. There you go.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I was First of all, I would like to ask if I have your permission to record this part of the AMA.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically, I am doing a philosophy project, and I thought that you would be a good candidate because I'm supposed to choose a philosopher from the 20th century to talk about their philosophy and basically analyze it. Yeah. So I came up with a few questions, and I'm just gonna.
Okay, sounds good. I barely count as from the 20th century because I got my PhD in 1998.
Right. So to start off, okay. Would you still believe trigger warning, rape, murder, theft, etc. are wrong if there are no societal conventions? Also, just for some context, I did read part of your work on ethical vegetarianism and something called the conscience of a human being.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, the answer to that is clearly yes. Like, what's wrong with killing people is not simply that other people will disapprove of it. Like, what's wrong is that it harms that person.
Second question. What are your beliefs on the use of working animals such as police dogs, search rescue dogs, service dogs, therapy animals, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, this seems okay to me, provided that they're not suffering, right? So, if you're treating your service animal well and it has a good life, then I don't really see the problem with it. Like I think some people think, oh, well, you're like forcing the animal to work. But I mean, I I think that the animals are not really objecting to it, generally speaking, right? So, like I don't really see the problem.
Okay, and last question. What would you say to people who talk about ethical farming or free range farming? Do you believe that it would be morally wrong to consume flesh of animals that have been in a hypothetical situation or treated humanely and given the best life?
Yeah, I'm not sure. So, when I discuss this in the book in the dialogues on ethical vegetarianism, I didn't take a very definite stand on it because it's kind of hard to answer. It depends on whether you think that animals have rights, and that's not really clear to me. Like, I don't know of strong arguments that they do, and I don't know of strong arguments that they don't. Um, I mean, but as a practical matter, usually when the thing says free range, that doesn't mean that much. It doesn't actually mean that there isn't cruelty involved. So most of the time, you just shouldn't, like in the real world, you shouldn't buy the products anyway. But if it is humane, I think then the question becomes like whether you should have a utilitarian view or a rights-based view about animal interests. And so I'm not really sure about that. I feel like if there was some very important human interest at stake, then I would treat the animal interest in a utilitarian way. Like if it was a matter of saving a person's life by killing an animal, I would kill the animal. But if it's a matter of just like somebody wants a little bit more pleasure, and then we have to kill animals to do it, I wouldn't do that.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for your time. I shall be.
All right, thank you. You're welcome.
All right, perfect. And I think Bryn, you're going to read out a question now. Bryn? Michael, can you hear Bryn?
I cannot.
Well, that was,
I can't either.
could you hear Bryn?
Nope, we're gonna have to go on without
Okay.
Bryn.
Perfect. All right, so I think we're going to ask a question from the non-vegan section. I Okay, here's a good one, actually. How are your vegan views compatible with your anarcho-capitalist views? How likely is it that animal rights laws would be enforced in an anarcho-capitalist society? Also, how likely is it that an ANCAP society would have food and ingredient labeling standards so that the vegans and others can make informed and ethical choices about what they buy?
Yeah, so I mean, in answer to the second one, like if there's a market demand for something, then people will provide it. So, um, there's a bunch of people who want to know what's in their food. The people who care about that, there will be that product for them. About the laws, though, yeah, I think it is plausible that like a lot of people would still be abusing animals, but I would say, like as a practical matter, which is better, the government or no government? Like in reality, so there are animal welfare laws, but in reality, the government is causing more animal suffering than they're preventing, right? Because they're like subsidizing the meat industry. So like, what happens is, oh, well, the meat industry can lobby the government. And that's just like, that's going to happen whenever you have a government. So there's no perfect solution. So there's always going to be social problems and whatever, just like global problems, which will not be solved in any system. And you just have to sort of ask what system has the least problems, right? So now what's probably going to happen in the future, actually in reality, even though we have a government, what's going to happen is not that the government is going to ban factory farming. What's actually going to happen is that it's going to be replaced by synthetic meat. Right. So basically, what we're actually going to get is a market solution, right? People are going to come up with a way of producing this product that's going to be better. And then that's what's really going to stop the cruelty.
All right. Sounds fantastic. So, Nick. Nick, are you cool to come up? I'm going to invite you to speak right now.
Hey.
Here we go.
Hey.
Hi, hi, Dr. Huemer.
Hi, how's it going?
I'm doing great. Cool. Well, thanks a lot for speaking with me today. So I've been following your work for several years since Bryn actually introduced you to me a couple years ago. I've been a vegan for 26 years, and it's fun. Some of the time I spent as a neuroscientist, and I've really been interested in sort of problems of rationality and how it operates in the brain. I discovered one person's work about 20 years ago. But I kind of didn't accept it until maybe a few years ago. It was John McKeil's work. Are you familiar with this? He's done work on he's done a lot of things with different trolley dilemmas, like varying the trolley dilemma in different ways.
Yeah.
He did one interesting hypothetical where he took the standard trolley dilemma and he has the track looping back onto the main track, where then it strikes 5 people downstream. And he did this in order to modify the footbridge scenario, where you push someone on the track, so you can still just push a lever. You put the person in the side track, and and you can basically decide to push a lever and move the lever and move the train so it goes into the side track. It strikes the person and slows the train down enough so that when it rejoins the track, it will not hit 5 people downstream.
Right.
So that's the idea. It's basically the same as pushing someone on the track. And then the variation of that is he puts a giant rock downstream of the man, but upstream to the 5 people. So when the same thing's happening, you divert the train, but now when it hits the man as a byproduct of you flipping the track. But the man didn't have to be there to stop the train because the rock was there. And so that's really the difference between, say, like a double effect. And so here we have 2 qualitative differences between a double, the sort of killing someone as collateral damage to doing a good act versus actually using someone as a tool to stop the train. Those are qualitative differences, but they're both bad. And yet, and it's really hard sometimes to adjudicate how something like that's exploitative could maybe be not as bad as something that is simply involves collateral damage, but is actually a well-intentioned act. Like, let's say, slapping a baby to save 1 billion babies might be better than taking your Humvee and going through a crowded park to get to the theater 5 minutes earlier, even though you're killing lots of people, but that's collateral damage. and like crop deaths might be more collateral damage, and eating meat and dairy products is more the exploitative thing. But I guess how do you weigh these quantitative factors versus the qualitative difference between an act that is bad versus an act that is qualitatively worse, that is collateral damage versus an exploitative act of using someone as a tool?
Yeah,
Sorry,
well,
there's a lot. Sorry, there's a huge
yeah.
amount. So yeah.
Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, I mean, so there's a loop version of the trolley problem, and I don't have very firm intuitions about that. Like when I think about that, it's not totally obvious to me. I feel like I sort of have to evaluate it using a theory, right? And so, like in the initial version where you push the guy in front of the trolley, so that seems wrong. And then the case where the guy is on the track, and like the trolley has to hit him first in order to stop and not hit the other people. I guess that sounds relevantly like pushing the person in front of the trolley. So
Yeah, those are equivalent.
Yeah, I mean,
Because one involves physical act of pushing versus
yeah. I
but
mean,
still,
yeah, like I mean, maybe there's a difference whether you're diverting the trolley or diverting the person, right? Diverting the trolley towards the person or diverting the person towards the trolley. But I don't know. Okay, but so I guess the loop version is wrong. Now, when it comes to animals, like I don't really know if you should take a rights-based or a utilitarian approach. But I mean, fortunately, in most practical questions, you don't have to answer that because, like, it's pretty easy. Like the utilitarian calculation goes against the animal exploitation in the first place, so you don't have to resolve whether they have rights. There might be some cases where it really does matter. Like maybe if we're like experimenting on animals and if that actually saves human lives. Not the experiments that don't save anyone, like the experiments on cosmetics, because like those failed the utilitarian test. But let's say you were actually doing experiments that would kill the animals, but they would also save human lives. Then it would matter if you're a utilitarian or a rights theorist. In those cases, like without being sure what the right view is, I think I would sacrifice the animals. Because I don't know. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess I was just trying to see the difference between your view on actually using someone as an object, like or sacrificing an animal, using someone as a tool for some act of good, versus a collateral damage side effect to a benevolent act. So
Yeah.
the two draw the loop dilemma and the other one are identical. The only difference is that you put a rock downstream of the guy on the sidetrack who's in the loop. Because the idea is that when the rock is there, then when you divert the train, his death is collateral damage, just like in the standard trolley dilemma.
Yeah.
It's not actually using that person as a tool the way you would in like the organ harvesting case or pushing someone onto the track. So I guess how do you weigh a bad act like using someone or a bad act like a collateral damage killing but for a good intent, like the double effect, or an actual exploitative act?
So like I guess in the case where the rock is there, turning the trolley is okay, right? I guess, although it's a little bit weird, right? Like, I mean, these variants of these examples can sort of push you towards consequentialism, right? Like, you imagine that you could divert the trolley towards the one person, and there's not a rock there, but you could put a rock there in addition. So, like, it's going to be okay to divert the trolley if you put the rock there. Not if you don't. But it could be that like putting the rock there doesn't actually accomplish anything, right? Like, the trolley will be stopped if it hits either the man or the rock. But you put the rock there to make it so that it's a side effect rather than exploiting the person, right? And then that could kind of seem pointless. Anyway, so they're like there are ethical puzzles about these things. But anyway, like I guess the scenario with the rock there is it's okay to turn the trolley.
Well, it's bad, just not as bad as if you're using the guy as a tool.
Yeah.
Because you're still murdering the guy.
Yeah, he's going to be killed, but he's going to be killed as a side effect, not as a goal.
Yeah, cool. All right, great. Well, I guess I don't want to hog the screen.
Yep. Thanks.
So thanks a lot. Thanks for talk to you later, or maybe not. All right. How do I get off? All right. Hey,
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, there you are.
Okay, awesome. So I'll ask the question that I intended to ask earlier, but my microphone wasn't working. interestingly, Professor Huemer, the most requested question we had for you was whether or not you think that there is such thing as a best way to convince anyone, and if so, what that is.
Oh, yeah. I don't know. This is sort of beyond my expertise because, I don't know. I guess it's a psychology question, but I think psychologists maybe don't even know either. And also, like, most people are super hard to convince. Like I did my best with that book, right? So, like one of the things that I wanted to do was I wanted it to be kind of entertaining. So that's part of why I did this dialogue format. There's like I remember a remark by a television show writer where this is the person who wrote the TV show Justified was saying, I leave out the parts that people would skip over. And then he says, like, I bet you don't skip over dialogue. Right. And that's true. So so I thought that make it a little bit entertaining and make it clear. And yeah, and then I guess, I just try answering the arguments rationally. I don't know if I don't know if it works. I've heard that it's more persuasive if you have a video that shows some of the animal cruelty, right? Because I think that what happens sometimes is people are intellectually convinced, but they don't care. They found out that eating meat is wrong and they just don't care that it's wrong. And so maybe you can you can add showing a video. So sometimes in class I show that video, What Cody Saw, which you can find on YouTube. And then maybe people will sort of, in addition to understanding why this is wrong, then maybe their emotions will be influenced.
Awesome, thanks. You want to take the next one, Parker?
Yeah, I think I told someone I was gonna bring him up. Who did I?
Well, if we have Arco ready to go, we could bring Arco up for a political question.
But I did say Cypher, and Cypher's here. So
okay.
Then we'll get Arco.
Hi, Professor. I'll be the 10th person to thank you today for joining us. We'll really appreciate it here. So I have 2 questions, mostly related to your anarcho-capitalist position, and I feel like it somewhat has entailments that are tangential to veganism. But I'm sure you're aware that the overwhelming majority of vegans tend to be more left of center, especially relating to economics. And so I would like to know, how would you respond to a leftist critique using a Marxist definition of exploitation, asserting that capitalism cannot achieve the ends of veganism due to the inherent exploitative nature of capital?
Yeah, I mean, so first, I want to sort of reiterate that, in thinking about politics, you should not compare a system to a utopia. Rather, we should compare compare what the realistic alternatives are. So I think it's true that capitalism doesn't solve the problem of animal exploitation, but I also think government doesn't either. And so then you should think, okay, there are these Marxist governments. There were a bunch of Marxist governments throughout the 20th century. Yeah, and how many of them prohibited animal cruelty? Right? Because and I mean, I think it's more likely that the government is going to use its power to support animal cruelty. About the question about exploitation. Wait, sorry?
Oh, it's just, agreeing.
About the exploitation. So, of course, I don't agree with the Marxist theory of exploitation. I don't agree with it basically because I think it turned on the labor theory of value, which is false and is, just basically almost everyone in economics. If you study economics, you're going to agree that the labor theory of value is false. And without that, then you don't have the theory of surplus value, and then you don't have the theory of exploitation.
Okay, cool. And I guess my second question is sort of a follow-on from that. In reforming away from modern capitalism to a more just society, be it ANCAP or otherwise, what do you think are the most ethically pressing questions regarding which reformation should be next?
I mean,
just the top 3 would be amazing.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I don't really think of the animal exploitation as a pressing question because I think it's just we know the answer. Like
Yeah.
we know that what we're doing is wrong. Like it's not really confusing. What's difficult is just to get people to do the right thing. And now, if you're thinking about priorities, well, like it's hard to see how the mistreatment of animals could not be the top priority given just the numbers, right? So, like according to UN statistics, we're slaughtering something like 74 billion animals per year, which is like close to 10 times the human population of the world. In fact, it's of the same order of magnitude as the total number of human beings who have ever lived, right? Because only about 110 billion human beings have ever lived in the history of the world. So, like, I don't know, like what we're like the harm that we're causing seems to outweigh any human problem, right? So,
Yeah, sweet.
yeah, I don't know. And then, like, I mean, if you want to know, what are the important priorities within politics other than animal welfare, I'm not really sure. Like what I try to do is I try to promote rational thinking, right? So I kind of think like if you get people to be committed to rationality, maybe that helps with every other problem. So although this isn't traditionally considered a political issue, I think sort of like promoting the goodness of rational thinking is like the top priority.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Thanks for your time. Parquet told me I'm only allowed 2 questions, so I'll depart. Hope you guys enjoy the rest of the stage.
Oh, and
Okay,
Cypher, whoops. Well, Cypher, we might have you on a little bit later. Again, bring him back for a part 2. But so I think I want to do a little lighthearted one.
Sure. Either before or after that, Pocket, do you mind if I hop in for an exploitation question?
Yeah, go crazy. But this one I think will just take like 3 seconds because I think the answer is a little obvious. What is your favorite animal?
I mean, there's so many good ones, but I do have a picture of an owl as my logo there because I think of them as like the symbol of wisdom. But I do like cats quite a lot because they're so cute.
Gotcha. Perfect answer. All right, Ren, you want to drop an exploitation one?
Yeah, I think sort of ironically with the owl wisdom symbol, they're not the most intelligent species. Their eyes take up a good portion of their heads. They actually have relatively small brains. But the question that I had was, so you denied the Marxist account of exploitation in the previous question. I'm interested in what you think the necessary and sufficient criteria for exploitation are, if you've ever thought about that. We had a conversation here the other day about the non-worseness condition, but maybe you have a more full account of what you think exploitation means.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, I wanted to say a little bit more about like the capitalist exploitation. So, like, I think that what underlying the theory, like, I think a bunch of people maybe they're not so attached to the labor theory of value. They just have the sense that the capitalist class is getting a huge amount of benefit without providing a lot of benefit in return. And they're only getting this because they're sort of like the gatekeepers for access to capital, right? And like you might think this is not a productive activity, so why are they getting a whole bunch of money, right? And so that sounds exploitative. Okay, and my answer to this is, well, I think this is just factually not true. That is, I think the capitalists are actually adding economic value. And it's not exactly obvious, but they're doing things that are highly economically valuable, and that's the actual explanation of how they're getting rich. So like one of the things is you have to have people who delay gratification by saving money, and then you have to have people who are evaluating the viability of business ideas, and then you have to have people who are willing to take risks, and just most people are not willing to do those things. And those things are crucial for there to be productivity in a society. So anyway, okay, so like that's sort of the more fundamental story about why I don't think the capitalists are exploiting. But it's not that I don't believe there is such a thing as exploitation. Like intuitively, there are some actions that count as exploitation. This is an example from the philosophy literature. Like, so you're caught in a snowstorm on a mountain, and you have to call a tow truck. And it happens that there's only one tow truck company that's operating in that place and time. And so the tow truck driver goes there and he's like, yeah, I'll tow your car for like $2,000. Right? And let's say the normal price for a tow is like 100. Okay, and the guy is saying this because he knows that no other tow truck is going to come, right? And he knows that you know that. Okay, that seems exploitative, right? But in this case, I think like part of what's exploitative is that the person is they're taking advantage of this non-competitive situation to charge a lot more than the competitive price. Right, like the competitive price, i.e. the price that you get in a normal situation where there are different tow truck companies, right, competing for your business. So, like, and that to me gets the intuitions pretty well, but also explains why you can't argue that the market price in general is exploitative.
Right. Gotcha. Pocket, did you want to move on to another question now?
Yeah, I think we should do a brief vegan one, just because the server before we get back into political theory. So let's see. Oh, I think a good one would be crop deaths. What do you think is the best response to criticisms about crop deaths? What do you think vegans should do about crop deaths, particularly around when vegans should buy non-essential items that could cause more crop deaths, and whether vegans should grow their own food, especially if it's a possibility?
Oh, I don't know. Expecting people to grow their own food sounds to me too demanding. Like, I haven't tried to do this, so I'm not sure how hard it is, but I suspect that most people would not succeed if they tried to grow enough food to live on and enough variety and so on. But I think this is different from the usual call for people to just, go vegetarian or vegan because it's a lot easier, right? I kind of think when I give the argument for being vegan, I think the argument is good because it's relatively low cost and there's a huge advantage, and you should try to minimize the amount of harm that you're causing. If you can easily vastly reduce the amount of harm that you're causing, then you should do it. Okay, now and then sometimes people say, well, when you buy plants, they're still causing harm. And so I go, yeah, but this is a lot less harm. And a serious conscientious person doesn't say, oh, well, everybody's causing harm, so I'm just going to do anything that causes any amount of harm. I'm just going to not give a shit at all. That would not be a decent thing to say. When you realize that the world is imperfect and no matter what you do, there's going to be maybe some harm and there's going to be some risks. Your reaction should be, okay, well, what is a reasonable thing I can do to reduce the risks, so that they're not that big, but also, not taking enormous unreasonable costs on myself either.
Gotcha. So what would you think about, because a lot of times carnivores and ketos, and I don't mean meat eaters, I mean exclusive meat eaters. Also, there's a little bit of an echo. I can hear myself. I'm not sure if there was anything you changed on here. Oh, it's gone now. Okay. So yeah, they will often say okay, well, we only need one cow, to feed everyone for a year. And so we can just raise this one cow grass fed, so we're not causing more crop deaths, I guess they say. And that versus, what you and I probably eat, which, and they argue that that's going to be more than one animal a year. So would it be okay to eat the cow to stop, instead of the crop death ones?
Yeah, so as a factual matter, this sounds very false, right? So to raise a cow, you have to feed it, and the amount of food that you have to feed, like the amount of calories that the cow has to eat, is larger than the amount of calories that the people are going to get when they eat the meat, right? And that's like is like a truth of physics. So like that is not going to change. So,
but there would not be harvesting, is what they would say. So like grain fed, right? You're gonna like grow more, but grass, you're not like growing crops that like that. Thus, the harvester comes over and gets all the little insects and creatures.
I see. I mean, so sort of as a practical matter, I think that the people who are going to say things like this are not, in fact, doing the thing that they're saying. That
no, they're
right?
not.
Right. So then what they're doing is actually just like coming up with they're trying to come up with an excuse for ignoring ethics is what's really happening, right? Is like, okay, when you convert to doing this other thing, like buying only humanely raised meat, then I will believe that you're sincere.
Yeah.
But okay, but anyway, yeah, should we do that? You can, so the claim was that you could feed a person for an entire year with one cow. This doesn't sound plausible.
That's what I've heard. But like we could look at like I don't know the amount of calories in a whole cow. That does sound a little weird. 430,000 kilocalories. But instead of going through the math, we can just say, what if it was the case?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not a math guy. I saw a number and gave up.
Yeah. I mean, gee, wouldn't it be better to, plant some plants and then, they're right because they're saying just have this cow that's just grazing in a field somewhere. Well, why not just have some plants that are growing in the field and then we gather them? Why wouldn't that be better? I don't know. I mean, this is kind of repetitive, but like I have ambiguous views about humanely raised meat. Like I think if we were doing that, it would be less clear whether it was wrong. Like humanely raised and then slaughtered after having a good life, painlessly. Then is it okay to eat the meat? I think that's less obvious. I do kind of feel like it's at least like you should at least regard that as morally risky, right? Like so you shouldn't do that unless there's some good reason why you need to do that. Now and then people are thinking, yeah, but like when you eat the plants, like they're going to be killing insects when they harvest the plants, right? But I don't think that insects are sentient, so I don't really care, right? So there's scientific research on this. There's stuff like like an insect will continue mating or continue eating while another part of its body has been smashed, and they'll just like if one of the legs has been damaged, it'll just keep walking and putting the same force on that leg as on a damaged leg. And so there's just like evidence that they don't feel pain.
Interesting. Yeah, that seems a little. Yeah, I think I saw like one of your past interviews, and you're like, yeah, typically humans, when half of our entire body is crushed, we don't just go about doing what we were doing before, like eating, walking around or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Fantastic. So Arco, are you ready to come up? He's gonna another political theory question. All right, inviting him. There he is.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi.
Hi. Do you prefer Professor Huemer or Michael?
Oh, I don't know. Whatever. I prefer Galactic Emperor Professor Huemer.
Well, Galactic Emperor Professor Huemer, it's a delight to be speaking with you today. I'm a big fan of your work, especially your ontological argument for moral realism and also your work on the problem of political authority. I haven't finished the problem of political authority, but I was very convinced by the opening chapter on social contract theories not really working. I agree with all of your arguments there. My question has to do with a quote of yours that I didn't find in one of your works, but I found in another work that was addressing problems with ethical relativism. And so this is from the excerpt of that work. I can't remember the author, but they say, as Michael Huemer aptly puts it, Skeptics cannot explain the pervasive trend toward liberalization of values over human history, and that the best explanation is the realist. Humanity is becoming increasingly liberal because liberalism is the objectively correct moral stance. And this piqued a question for me. If liberalism is the objectively correct moral stance, does this justify individuals forcefully bringing non-liberal states or groups into liberalism? And I have a follow-up question, but do you want to address that question first?
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't sound very liberal, does it?
Yeah, true.
So you have things like like the Bush administration's nation building, which is how I describe the Iraq War, right? Like, okay, so they said they were doing it because of weapons of mass destruction, but I think a big part of the motivation was, they thought they were going to fix Iraq and turn it into a liberal democracy, right? And then yeah, so one of the problems is that there's a kind of inconsistency because this isn't a liberal thing to do. And another problem is that it doesn't work so well, which we saw from that example. Like, it's just not that easy. And like, if you start a violent conflict, that doesn't usually result in people being more liberal afterwards. You're like, okay, maybe like you terrorized some people, you terrified some people into not resisting, then you angered other people, so then they start like, bombing your facilities or whatever. And like, so it just doesn't really work out that well that everyone becomes more liberal.
And then the follow-up question is more sort of a question of how would we go about liberalizing the world in a liberal way, ethically, that's also in line with sort of anarcho-capitalist ideals. So do you imagine kind of an ideal anarcho-capitalist way of achieving moral progress for the entire planet?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's going to happen anyway. Like, it's happening anyway. It's just going to continue. And how do we speed it along? I don't know. I mean, part of what we want to do is provide a good example. So, like, part of what brought down the Soviet Union was the example of the United States and Western Europe, because people in those societies knew about these other societies where things were going a lot better. So that might be one thing, just sort of like I don't know, like publicize the way things are going in the places where things are going well. And just sort of like what I'm doing is, so to speak, producing propaganda, which I mean in a good sense, not in a bad sense. True and non-misleading propaganda, right? That is, just giving the arguments for why this is a good way to do things, right? Why it's good to respect people's freedom and their autonomy and respecting their interests.
Thank you very much. That answers all my questions. I really appreciate your time.
Yep, thanks.
All right, thank you, Arco. Now we're gonna have. Oh, Husky, you're here. Great. We're gonna have Uncritical up real quick, and then Husky would love to have you. They've been very interested in intuitionism and realism in general, so they'll probably have a lot to say. But for now, I think Uncritical, I just invited you up to speak. There you are.
Hello.
Hi.
It's good to have you here. I'm glad to see another philosophy face. I'm a philosophy major in college currently.
Great.
So I kind of wanted to ask you if you were familiar with anything about like the animal studies programs that are sort of springing up.
Oh, no. Sorry.
Okay. So I'll give a little like rundown, I guess. So animal studies are kind of like these programs where it's sort of like an intersectional view about how we can look at animals, like both philosophically, based like scientifically. And I wondered like how these kinds of programs, which it seems to me that they sort of attempt to like create empathy for animals, like have us think about them in ways that are not traditionally like more than just beings to slaughter and eat, so to speak. So I was wondering if you had an opinion on how these sort of programs might be used to promote advocacy or to sort of I guess, be used by vegans to create empathy in the world for
Yeah.
animals.
Yeah, good. I mean, in fact, I think, one of the big problems is people not having enough empathy. So, like, people who are highly immoral towards other people are commonly people who are low in empathy or perhaps even lacking empathy, like the psychopaths.
Right.
But even ordinary people, so normal people can empathize with other people, but don't empathize with other species. And this is just part of why they're constantly causing enormous amounts of harm. So if there's some way that we can get people to empathize, that would probably make them more ethical. But how to do this, I'm not really sure. So, like one thought is just like have them watch the videos about animals being mistreated, and maybe their capacity for empathy will kick in. Another thought is, like maybe having people read stories or just like hear stories about animals from their own perspective. So I think that I'm just sort of like naturally prone to empathize with animals. So I don't think anyone had to do anything special, but like I did consume some stories as a child that were like from the viewpoint of animals, like Watership Down. And then and then when people just if you could just like start taking their perspective, then you're going to see how horrible human beings appear, right?
Right. All right. Thank you. I appreciate you answering the question and being here for that.
Yeah. Thanks.
All right. Husky. Get on up here. Oh, did they message me or something? Oh, no.
It says Team Realism.
Hello.
Oh, yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you very much for, I guess, coming into the server today. I really appreciate it. It's always nice to have someone really smart to talk to.
Thanks.
All right. So I guess I have a collection of thoughts. I'll try and formulate them into a proper question. So I guess my first question would be, basically, how do we discern what like moral truths are if people genuinely have conflicting intuitions? Like I liked your example of in one of your videos about like torturing babies and how most people would find torturing babies basically immoral. But let's say we found someone who didn't think that. Who would be right in that instance?
Well, we would be right and they would be wrong. So that's easy.
No, but like, how do we know?
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah. Well, we think about the baby torture and then we see that it's wrong. So that's how we know that's wrong. And then if somebody denies something that's true, then they're wrong by definition. So that's how we know they're wrong. You could sort of like imagine people who have crazily implausible views about other subjects. And what do you say? You're like, well, like all you could ever say is, well, the reason that I know that you're wrong is, and then I repeat the reason why I believe what I believe, right? Now, in this case, like, are there actually people who feel fine about baby torture? Yeah, well, only psychopaths, basically, right? And the reason, the reason for this is that they're basically congenitally incapable of empathy. So they're incapable of taking another person's perspective. And like making moral judgments requires taking into account different perspectives and not just your own.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, so I mean, it's like, so like the realistic example of this happening is a psychopath, but that person just has like a severe deficit, right?
I suppose so, yeah.
And I mean, like in reality, you're not going to find people who are otherwise perfectly normal, but baby torture seems good to them. Right?
I suppose it'd be a good time to sort of bring animals in, and then we can say that most humans are like, maybe not about the torture part, but definitely fine with killing them.
Yeah.
And I would say, like, just like how thousands of years ago, when people thought that, the Earth was at the center of the universe, it wasn't. And just because they thought it was, like, doesn't make it the case. But then it can also work in the opposite. Like, if a small amount of people thought the world was flat shaped, doesn't make it flat. So I suppose it's, I don't know, it just seems very difficult to try and discern what, like, a moral truth would be, just because we can't really measure it like we can measure a straight line between 2 points, or like the shape of the Earth, sort of thing.
Yeah. I mean, in order to measure anything, you have to like trust your senses. So
And that too.
Suppose somebody asks you, oh, well, how do you know that, the senses are reliable and it's not all a dream? So, well, I mean, I think the only answer to that is I assume that things are the way they appear unless I have a specific reason for thinking otherwise. And I don't have any reason for thinking that this is all a dream. So I'm just going to assume that the external world is real. Right. And what I think about morality is, well, unless somebody gives me a reason why I should think that torturing babies is okay, I'm going to assume that it is the way it appears, which is that it appears wrong.
Oh, okay. So there's like opposition in terms of one of your beliefs. It's a good idea to sort of, I guess, give it an air of doubt, I suppose. Okay. Oh, am I actually holding the right intuition here?
Yeah, I mean, like I think if there's a reason for doubting that it's right, then you should doubt. But otherwise, you should just, like assume that it's right. Right. So like if there, and I mean, this is part of why it's relevant that normal people don't actually have the intuition that baby torture is okay. If there were a lot of normal people who like did not have any deficits, like they weren't incapable of empathy or anything like that, but just seemed like babies needed to be tortured, then we would have some reason for doubting that, I guess.
Okay. I suppose with going back to like animals, with regards to like I remember what you were saying about basically like the difference between humans and animals and things like that, to sort of draw out why someone should care about animals, or at least go vegan. And I suppose the issue with that is I've met a few people who essentially like they can name those traits, and it's sort of like you run into like a brick wall. And I'm just sort of curious as to what you could do.
I'm sorry, I'm not clear on what happens. Wait, you met people and what happens? What do they say?
Oh, basically what you're saying before about like how, like why should I care about animals? It's like, okay, well, you already care about X, and X is very similar to Y, which is basically like you already care about humans, and these animals are very similar to humans. That's why you should care about animals. But then they go, oh, I reject that.
Well, okay. What part do they reject? Do they not care about humans?
Well, they do care about humans, but they don't think that it necessitates caring about animals, like in sort of almost any way.
Yeah, and do they explain why humans are different from other animal species?
Yeah. So they've got two traits. Essentially, one's self-awareness.
Yeah.
So, okay, fine. Then there's also like they've also got like human shell, essentially.
Wait, sorry, they have what? Human what?
Human shell. It's basically like they look human.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right. So then, so if somebody does plastic surgery on you, then it's going to be okay to torture you. Right? Like they do the plastic surgery so you don't look human anymore.
And then they'd sort of argue like, oh, you were human previously.
I see. Okay. So like if somebody is born with severe birth defects, then you can torture them. Right. Severe birth defects that make them look not human, then you can torture them. Or right. Or like
or maybe.
Or if you build a robot and it looks human, then you can't torture it. But if it doesn't look human, then you can.
Oh, we used a flower when someone was running this. There's a flower that looks like a monkey, and they put the bullet on the flower having value.
I see. Okay, so this strikes me as not sincere. right? Like this strikes me as a bad faith conversation where the person is not trying to identify what's true. About self-awareness, like I think you can go back to the marginal cases argument, right?
Yeah, of
Like
course.
there's a point before which the baby is not self-aware, and then you probably wouldn't want to say that you can torture it.
Yeah. All right. I think we were only allowed 2 questions, right? But if I have enough time, I'd love to come back up. But thank
Yeah,
you
well,
for answering my questions.
Yeah, thanks.
oh shit, I had a question and I kind of forgot it. Bryn, do you have anything? Oh,
Yeah,
right.
for sure. Go ahead.
Sorry. So in your paper, revisionary intuitionism, you set out these like 4 ways to screen our intuitions, right?
Yeah.
And so like one of them, it seems to have to do with like which distress intuitions that like we just seem to have like evolutionary reasons to do.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering about the whole Peter Singer argument about the like drowning child in front of you, when you get on your nice sneakers, and you have to jump into the water and ruin your sneakers to save the kid's life. Everyone's going to tell you that you ought save the kid's life, but then everyone would not tell you that like I should sell my nice sneakers right now to save some kid's life by giving them food in a situation where they need it all the way across the world. And I was wondering if you thought that the reason that our intuitions are like this is because of some sort of evolutionary thing with like proximity.
Oh yeah. Maybe. I mean, like that's what Peter Singer would argue, and other utilitarians. So like I think that's not a implausible theory, but I don't think it's obviously correct. So like it seems to me like part of what's going on is we don't think that morality should be extremely unreasonably demanding. And so if you say the thing about selling your sneakers right now so that you can give the money to charity, it's just apparent that you're going to have to sell almost everything and give almost all of your income to charity. And then that makes the whole thing, that makes like morality as a whole just like way more demanding. If you say, when you pass by a child who's drowning in a pond, you have to wait in and pull the child out, that's not making morality extremely demanding, right? Because that is not going to be happening every second for the rest of your life. But the thing where like there are charities that are taking donations to help the poor, that is going to be happening every second for the rest of your life, right? Like I think that might be part of it.
Okay, sounds great. Yeah, I share all of those thoughts. Perfect. Did you, Bryn, did you want to ask anything?
Oh,
Bryn?
we can't hear.
Oh no.
Yeah. No. It's good. I was just muted. Yeah. So I think going back to what some of the non-vegans are asking in here, do you think that it is advisable for vegans to sort of have these sort of minimal positions, like so, for example, advocating people to swap just to pesco-vegetarianism or to just eating mussels and clams? Or do you think that there's enough of a risk there that they should always argue in favor of just veganism?
I mean, I think mussels and clams are fair game because there's no central nervous system. Now, so you might say, oh well, there's like a very small risk, right? But I kind of think like, well, like everything has some small risk, and like so, oh, like the clams have some ganglia, right? Like they have some nerve cells. But the thing is, like, you have ganglia in your body, and if they get stimulated and the signal never reaches your central nervous system, you will not say that you're in pain, right? Like you won't feel any pain. And so, it's not impossible, but it's just very low probability that they could feel pain. Anyway, as a practical matter about trying to convince people, I'm not really sure, but my guess is that taking a really extreme position might turn people off. So if you're like, yeah, not even the clams, and they're like, but they don't have brains. You're like, yeah, but there's like a small chance. Right? Then I think you might come off as like an unreasonable extremist or something. Then people might not want to listen. And people are frequently irrational, so like it's really irrelevant. Like if they think that part of your position is extreme, they should still accept the reasonable parts. But because people are irrational, they might not. Right? They might then stop listening to the less extreme parts.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. So just sort of like circling back on that question, do you think that there's a sense in which it is advisable or good to become a pesco-vegetarian instead of a omnivore? Or do you think that there's some kind of deontic violation or something going on there such that they're not really morally distinct?
So like I say, I think the bivalves are okay with the lack of central nervous system. About fish in general, they could feel pain. I mean, I don't know if they feel pain, right? But it's like they have brains, so they might. I understand that there has been dispute about this. So like there's somebody who says that they don't feel pain because they don't have a neocortex, and in you, if like the pain signals don't reach your neocortex, then you don't feel any pain. But they do have pain behavior. They do stuff that makes it look like they feel pain. So I guess I would say, to be safe, you shouldn't, right?
Okay, interesting. And then I think another one that I think would be really interesting to tackle is sometimes in the sort of Discord vegan space, we think about the commitments that extend up and above and beyond just veganism for animal rights. And an interesting topic is the wild animal suffering space. Have you thought at all about wild animal suffering, and how does it tie into your political views, like your libertarianism and anarcho-capitalistic views?
Yeah, I mean, there's an enormous amount of wild animal suffering. I mean, I've thought about this partly in connection with the problem of evil in philosophy of religion, right? Because like there's the problem, if there's a God, then why is there so much suffering in the world? And like some of the responses are specifically human-centered, like, oh, there's suffering because we have free will and like we choose to do bad things. But that doesn't explain wild animal suffering. And there's an enormous amount of it, right? It's probably many times more than the amount of human suffering. And what should we do about that? Well, I don't think that we can stop it, without like disrupting the ecology and then having, enormous risks of causing mass extinctions. I think if we could stop the wild animal suffering at low cost, then we should obviously do it, right? Low cost without like destroying the ecology or like without killing all of the living things.
Interesting. Yeah. Actually, looping back to the problem of evil question you have there, Richard Brown, another philosopher, has written about the idea that there is an argument from evil for photosynthesis, and that, in fact, what we should do as humans is have a sort of Manhattan Project to enact photosynthesis in humans. Do you think that would be something that we're sort of obligated towards, or do you think that would just be a good thing to act towards? Or interesting.
Well, let's see. So, I mean, there's a question of whether you're obligated to do stuff to make the world better. And I guess if you could make the world much better at modest costs, then I think you're obligated to do so. But in this particular case, this totally doesn't sound feasible. Right?
Yeah.
So, like, it sounds like it would eat up a lot of resources, and those resources could have been used for something that would work. I mean, not something that would stop all animal suffering, but something that would create a lot of good. Like stopping malaria or something.
Yeah, actually, as an interesting extension of that response, do you have much thought on whether or not we should be more prone towards a long-termist sort of ethical altruism, or do you think we should focus on short-term problems which we have much more credence about what our activity might do?
Yeah. Well, like in principle, I believe the long-termist position. Like,
right.
I mean, maybe it's trivial, right? Like the overall amount of good matters. That's what matters. But also, I think like our beliefs about what contributes to the good in the long term are, pretty much random guesses. Like we totally don't know. And part of my reason for saying this is think about people a couple hundred years ago. Imagine somebody a couple hundred years ago making plans for stuff to happen today, right? So yeah, somebody in 1800 is making plans for the year 2020. How well do you think those plans would be going at this point? Like, right? They would totally not be working. Whatever it was, whatever they set up now, it would have long since, gone by the wayside and failed. And if whatever the program was that they started was still in existence, it totally wouldn't be achieving its goal, right? Because nobody had any idea what the world was going to be like today. And from this point forward, like technological advance is probably going to be even faster. So we have even less idea of what will be going on in 200 years.
Awesome. Yeah, Bucket, do you want to ask some questions? I think I stole up some time.
Yeah, well, someone asked about the evolutionary debunking style arguments.
Yeah.
Might be better to go over them briefly just for anyone who doesn't know.
Yeah, I mean, these are arguments where somebody says, well, usually people try to argue that our moral beliefs are in some way genetically programmed, right? Like maybe evolution selected for us to have a moral sense or something like this, certain kinds of moral emotions, and that has led to our moral beliefs. And then you're supposed to think, if that's true, then we don't have reason for thinking that our moral beliefs are objectively correct, because evolution would have designed us to have the moral beliefs that are promoting our own survival and reproduction, whether or not those moral beliefs were actually true, right? And so then it's supposed to make you skeptical about morality.
And how do you like to reply to those, given the arguments?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of things to say about it. Like some of the attempts to explain moral beliefs are, in evolutionary terms, are plausible, and some of them are totally not, right? So, I think some moral beliefs are properly debunked. Okay, and these are especially beliefs about, so to speak, reproductive ethics, right? Like how people think there are all of these moral constraints on who you can have sex with. Like people used to say that homosexuality was morally wrong. It's hard to find people saying that today, but that used to be a big thing. And oh, wow, why is that? And then they would have the weakest, lamest things to say about why it was wrong, oh, it's unnatural, right? And there's, but they wouldn't have a problem with a whole bunch of other things that aren't natural. And the best explanation is, well, they just had certain emotions that were instinctive, right? And there's an evolutionary explanation for why you would feel negative emotions about homosexuality, because the evolutionary imperative is to reproduce, and homosexual sex doesn't reproduce. So anyway, I think that's totally valid as a evolutionary debunking, right? The only reason why you thought that it was wrong was you were kind of biologically programmed. But then there are other cases where it totally doesn't seem like there's a good evolutionary explanation, right? So, if evolution was the explanation for all of our moral beliefs, why aren't we all ethical egoists? Right? Because evolution selects for people who serve their own interests, right? I've heard of the selfish gene, right?
Right.
Yeah, right. Or even more extreme, why doesn't everybody have the view that the moral imperative is to maximize the number of copies of your genes going in the next generation, right?
Yeah.
And most people, when they think about that, they think that's ridiculous on its face, right? And also, most people think that ethical egoism is ridiculous and is not even an ethical theory, right? Now, there are attempts to explain. There are, evolutionary psychologists' attempts to explain why people might have non-egoistic morality, but the thing is, they can only explain this in the sort of just so story way in which you can explain almost anything. Right? You could come up with a story for how somehow being altruistic might help your genes propagate, right? But that isn't what you would have initially thought. Okay, but you could come up with some story about how almost any behavior could help your genes propagate. Okay, so at that point, then I think that doesn't really give us evidence, for doubting the moral beliefs. Somebody mentioned earlier in this discussion that I had a paper whose title I've now forgotten now. Something about liberal realism. Anyway, I had a paper in which I talked about how there's been a lot of moral progress over time, and that's really hard to explain if you have like this evolutionary psychology account of morality, right? Like if our moral beliefs are explained by our genes, then like why has there been an enormous amount of change over time of people getting more liberal moral beliefs? If the liberal moral beliefs are supported by natural selection, then we should have always had them. And if they're not, then we shouldn't have them now, right? And it's not plausible that the gene pool has changed so dramatically in such a brief time, right, to explain the moral progress.
Right. Gotcha. Fantastic. Gonna do one more question from someone who is not currently here. They have a question about moral realism. Seeing as you're a moral realist, I'm wondering how exactly you reconcile people's intuitions causing them to reject their moral obligations. To use veganism as an example, why couldn't I recognize not being vegan is objectively immoral, but be entirely fine with that because I intuitively feel nothing wrong with eating animal products? What would even be the value of objective morality at that point when I can freely ignore it and continue to act with my own subjective framework? Perhaps this question is more suited for an activist than a philosopher, but being that you do care about rights of non-human animals, I imagine this must be something you've encountered before.
Well, I mean, I've encountered people who appear to be like that, right? Like it's fairly common for people to agree that meat eating is wrong and then to just keep doing it. And they don't appear to be very bothered by it. I wouldn't say that they're completely unbothered by it, right? But they're not bothered enough to stop doing it. Hold on a second, my screen has just gone black. Okay. Yeah. So okay, but I don't know. I mean, like maybe part of the question is a meta-ethical question, like should do moral values or do moral beliefs have to influence your behavior? So in this case, I would say like it does influence people's behavior a little bit, but not a lot, which indicates that most people are extremely immoral, right? So it's like I think if there was a product that was equally tasty, that didn't require animal cruelty and no more expensive, then people would switch over to that. Like, like I'm saying about the synthetic meat, like they will switch over to that for moral reasons if it's otherwise completely equal, right? But people are so, incredibly selfish that most people will not give up the extra pleasure of eating meat. Although there are still some people who will, which is why there are vegans at all, right? So like it's, it's strongly motivating to some people, and to other people, it's morality is just slightly motivating. Okay. And you might think like, oh, well, that's pretty lame. But, like I think the small number of people can have an outsized influence, right? Small number of conscientious people. They just like keep working on it. Right. Because, like that's part of why we're going to get synthetic meat in the first place. It's because there were a few conscientious, smart people who thought they could, and are thinking they can figure out how to provide a product that gives people what they want without the cruelty, right?
All right, thanks so much. So now we're gonna have up another guy who's got some practical ethics questions, I believe.
Yep.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Hey, I'm with you on the anarcho-capitalism, and I also read your book on ethical vegetarianism, and I agree with not supporting the factory farming industry. But I had a couple other questions about animal welfare that seem to be I get some different answers on. So I was wondering what your ethical attitudes were on backyard chickens, horseback riding, zoos, and also conservation hunting.
Wait, sorry, what was the first one?
Having like backyard chickens for eggs.
Yeah.
That are not factory farmed.
Okay, these things sound okay to me. like as long as you're treating the animals humanely.
Hmm.
I mean, I guess like some people think, oh, you're exploiting them and whatever, like making them work and so on. But I mean, I would note that this is kind of like what we do to each other also. Like, like, I mean, if you, I wouldn't call it exploitation, but like humans make other humans work,
Right.
and provide a benefit in return. Right? Like, well, okay. I mean, maybe we're not completely making each other work because you could just like live on the street and be homeless, right? But
Mhm.
you got to work if you got to work if you want to have like a kind of decent standard of living. It doesn't seem like it's wrong, to have the animals do work, provided that you're not like
Okay.
doing something really mean to them to make them do that, right?
I guess that explains the backyard chickens and the horseback riding,
Yeah.
but it doesn't so much explain conservation hunting or zoos.
Oh yeah. Okay. Huh. Yeah. What's the conservation hunting? Is it like would they say that
It's
they have to
like,
control the population or something?
yeah, it's like, for example, like if they say the population of yellow-tailed deer get too high, they need to hunt some of them to save other wildlife or save plants or stop them from coming onto like human territory.
I see. So like I guess as an ethical question, in principle, I would accept harming some animals to benefit a larger number. Whether that is actually benefiting the larger number, I'm not sure. It seems a little bit weird that nature needs us to come in and fix stuff, like what was going on before humans were there. So I guess I would be a little skeptical about whether that's actually necessary. About the zoos, I mean, I don't see the problem with them other than cruelty. Like if the animal is in too small of an enclosure, like that could be cruel. But if it's like if the objection is just, oh, like you're making money off off people coming and looking at the animals, I don't see what the problem is with that.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks for your time.
Yep. Thank you.
All right, perfect. So Brent, did you want to stay on a couple more ethics questions or go back to politics? There's some interest in the.
Yeah, so I'll do an ethics question while you sort out maybe another person to come on stage. The other day, Dr. Huemer, we talked about your ontological argument for moral realism, and a lot of people here found it intriguing as well as sort of this like basic level of off-putting, but couldn't quite put their finger on what exactly the problem is. One response that I usually see about the paper ends up in the premises that are not about the PRP. So, for example, people tend to like to deny, in your version of the argument, premise 4 or premise 5, and so straightforwardly deny that there is any reason at all to believe that objectivism of this domain is true. What do you think is the proper response to those kinds of analyses?
Yeah. Okay. Is there any reason at all, or is there any chance of moral realism being true? I mean, first, this is the majority view among ethicists, right? So there's a survey of philosophers' opinions, the Phil Papers survey. If anyone wants to read it, just go to philpapers.org or type in Phil Papers survey on Google or something. It's a survey of philosophers' opinions about lots of different questions, and moral realism is one of them. So it turns out that moral realism is more widely held than anti-realism. So if somebody says, these are the people who would be the experts on this, if anyone is. So if your initial position is there's zero chance that the majority expert opinion is correct, I am going to suspect that you are being a dogmatic ideologue just at the start there, okay? Like maybe, maybe you should open your mind to like read more of the works of the moral realists, right? If you want to know like okay, what reasons are there for believing moral realism? Then, like, I would refer you to the writings of moral realists, including myself. Right. So, like, one reason is that, well, it seems like some things are right and some things are wrong, and then like, there are different accounts of how that could be true without there being objective moral facts. But you can just sort of like go through these accounts, and like there are pretty compelling objections to all of them, right? Right. So somebody says, oh yeah, like some things are right and wrong, but right just means approved of by society. And then I think you can just show that that's not true, right? Because you can give examples where people will agree that there was something that was approved by society and was not right, and something that wasn't approved by society and was right, and stuff like that. And like, so we just don't like use moral language the way that we would use it according to this theory. And then you have the theory that, well, you're just expressing emotions. When you say something is right, you're just like expressing a positive emotion or something like that. And then I think you can just show, like, just by linguistic evidence, that that's not true. Like, X is right does not work in the way that hooray for X works, But anyway, okay, so, and then like the last thing that people will come to is like, oh yeah, well, maybe the moral statements are all just false. They're just like false statements. And I'm like, okay, so like you're 100% certain that that's true. Like, that contradicts things that seem about as obvious as anything, right? Like, you shouldn't torture babies just for fun. Seems to me about as obvious as anything. So, like, I think it's really hard for somebody to say, no, there's no chance of that being true.
Right. So another sort of category of attack that gets brought up, even by moral realists who are put off by the argument, is that the argument can be reformulated such that the anti-torture argument is a pro-torture argument. And so for that reason, the argument ends up unconvincing. What do you think is the proper response to those sorts of approaches?
Well, is that true? you can make a pro-torture argument?
Well, I mean, so they'll just claim that there's like an epistemic possibility for the converse, or even if it's not for the converse, for some other thing that might be morally ambiguous. Say, for example, abortion, where the view, at least from most public surveys in the United States, for example, is that it's about a 50-50 split. And so on that view, there's an epistemic possibility that abortion is wrong or abortion is right, depending on how you might feel about that.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. Right. So, it's uncertain whether abortion is wrong or permissible. And then, so you could make an argument, like you have a reason to not have an abortion because it might be wrong, like it might be comparable to murder, because like that's a thing that people argue. That's a thing that some non-stupid people argue, right? I think that's right. So what's the problem there? It's also true that you have a reason to have an abortion, right? But you definitely have a reason not to do it, and it's a moral reason. So, like that would be another example for moral realism, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. One thing that I'd like to point out to the students here was that you're talking about reasons, which I think maybe is worth just expanding on that for a moment. Like when you use reasons, do you think that is distinct from sort of how some lay people think about ethics, where they think about stuff like all things considered reasons instead of how you're using it?
Yeah, I mean, like you're saying you have a reason to avoid abortion doesn't mean that like that's not equivalent to saying that it's impermissible. You have a reason to not do it. Like, so don't have an abortion for no reason whatsoever, right? Like, or probably don't have an abortion for trivial reasons. That's compatible with your having other reasons in favor of having an abortion, and could be that the reasons in favor outweigh the reasons against, right? So, I mean, I take it that the relation between these concepts is you should do something if, like, overall you have the most reason to do it. That's compatible with there being, like there's usually conflicting reasons. There's usually reasons for and against an action. But like the nihilist view would be there's no reason for anything, right? They're like, they're not just saying like the reasons are balanced or that there are conflicting reasons. They're saying no reason whatsoever to do anything.
Right. Okay. And then so last question on this topic, and then I'll hand it back to Pake. Since you published the article, have you become aware of any other objections that you omitted from the paper that you think are interesting, at least, or worth people who seem to want to deny the paper to look into or more fully flesh out?
So no. So, sorry, short answer. But I didn't look for them. So I don't actually know if there are responses to the article in the literature. There might be, and I just haven't read them.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, so I'll hand it back to Paco.
All right, we're gonna get someone up here real quick. VAR 1. Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
There you go.
So I am kind of new to all this. I haven't really thought about it, but I had a question for Mr. Huemer.
Yeah.
So you said, so what is your exact criteria for valuing the worth of life, if it's okay to kill the particular organism or not? Because you were okay with killing an insect, or more particularly an organism without a central nervous system, because it does not feel pain when you kill it. So do you value life based on the pain an organism feels at its brink of death? Or surely that cannot be the only criteria, because if there are ways to kill even, let's say, an animal, a pig, or even a human being without they causing pain, let's say by using anesthesia, they do not feel pain when they die. So surely that cannot be the only way criteria for you for valuing life.
Yeah, I mean, you're like, you probably wouldn't want to die even painlessly, like, in your sleep tonight, right? And the reason for that is that it would cut off your future life, which will presumably be valuable, right? But what will make your future life valuable it will have to do with having positive experiences, right? So, yeah, so I mean, the problem with killing, well, part of the problem is like the pain of being killed at the moment, but part of the problem is like, cutting off your future positive experiences. I think if an organism is not capable of any positive or negative experiences, then it doesn't really matter that you cut off its future, like its future non-experiences, right?
Okay. True. And another question that I wanted to ask was, do you think morality is truly only subjective or only objective, or is there what is your opinion on this?
Yeah, it's objective. I think that's kind of a conceptual point about morality. So, like, I think there could be reasons for doing something that are subjective. Like, there could be reasons for action that are specific to you or dependent upon your attitudes and wouldn't apply to other people. But I think by definition, those aren't moral. Right? So, like, I have a reason to get chocolate instead of vanilla because I prefer chocolate. So that's like a subjective reason for action. But that's also why that's not a moral reason, right? Because it's just like my personal preference that doesn't apply to other people.
So are you saying it's okay for people not to always be morally right or morally correct?
No. Yeah, so, by definition, it's wrong to do things that are not morally correct. I think that, like, so you can have reasons for action that are not moral reasons, but I think like the correct moral assessment of actions takes into account people's preferences, right? So an example of this is, let's say there's somebody who's drowning in a river and you're deciding whether to jump in and save them, and it matters what the cost to you is. So like if you're not such a good swimmer and jumping into the river risks your own life, then you are not obligated to jump into the river. And if it's a trivial cost to you and like you could easily jump in with no risk, then you are obligated. And what this is illustrating is that morality takes into account the costs to you, right? So like the correct moral assessment already includes that, right? And so this is the explanation for why it's not permissible to choose self-interest over morality, right? Because that's a kind of double counting, right? Because the correct moral judgment already took account of your interests. So, it doesn't make sense to do the thing that's in your interest instead of the moral thing. Do you see what I mean?
True. Yeah, I mean, Another question that I had was, do you value all life equally in this? If they had, let's say, both, they could feel pain as well as they had the opportunity to experience positive experiences in their future life. Do you value both the organisms equally? Let's say a human baby and a pig.
So I don't value a human and a pig equally. Now, like, well, is this because I'm irrational or whatever? No, I mean, I think that, like, there's more valuable stuff in a human life than there is in a pig life. So even just like on consequentialist grounds, like the typical human life is a lot better than the typical pig life, even if no one is torturing the pig, So human beings have much richer experiences. Now, so, I'm saying pleasure and pain matters. And like, if you don't have any mental states, then I don't think that you have any welfare. But I'm not saying that pleasure and pain is the only thing that matters. And so, like, there's lots of stuff, so like, the pig could have sensory pleasure and pain, and maybe it can have enjoyable emotional experiences, but human beings can just have a wider range of, enjoyable experiences and also just like do valuable things besides just having enjoyment, that pigs can't do. So, yeah.
Gotcha.
All right.
Well, thank you.
Thanks so much, Var. So going into a little bit of political philosophy, there's a little thought experiment that a lot of economically left-wing people like to run, and someone was wondering your thoughts on it. So it's called the Coconut Island. Essentially, you crash. You know about it already?
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay. So you crash on a plane, basically, and you wake up on an island with one other person, and they've already gathered all of the coconuts, and and then they basically tell you, like, that you have to do something sexual to them in order to get the coconuts, right? Or else you'll die, and they already have all the coconuts. And the question is that exploitation? And then how is capitalism / private property and profits as currently practiced substantively different than the Coconut Island?
Yeah, so yes, that is exploitative. So, like my earlier comments about exploitation, I think cover this case, right? So what the person is doing is asking for, let's say, a lot more than the market price. Right? Like what would be the competitive market price, and they're taking advantage of the fact that there isn't a competitive market. Right? So in a competitive market, the price of coconuts, I don't know what it is. It's probably like a couple dollars for a coconut. It's not that you have to have sex with the person or whatever. Okay, and yeah. So in the why is the normal market transactions not exploitative, right? Yeah, I mean, because there's the competitive market, and you might think, oh, so what? Well, the competition, like, it brings down prices, and in the normal situation, like in a normal competitive market, the way that prices get set is the price is going to be about equal to the marginal cost of producing the good, right? And also about equal to the marginal benefit of the consumption of the good, right? Meaning that, like, if somebody were to produce an additional unit of the good, the cost of that on average is equal to the price of the thing. And so I don't think that you could say that that's an unreasonably high price, right? Like charging the marginal cost. Whereas with a coconut example, like, that seems unreasonably high. Oh yeah, the other thing I want to say, like, where I thought that example was going to go was just like questioning whether it's okay to appropriate all the property, or appropriate all the food and not leave any for anyone else. Like, I think it's very questionable that that's a legitimate appropriation, right? Like, you might say, when you get off, you might say, well, I'm just going to take some of these coconuts because you don't have any right to take all the coconuts in the first place.
Gotcha. All right, thank you. Bryn, do you want to say anything?
I don't know if you wanted to continue on the politics track. The only thing that I wanted to bring up was the Newcomb's paradox question that I had from one of his fans. So if you want to continue the politics thing for a little bit more, and then I'll ask that.
All right, I'll have to look real quick for a politics question.
Okay, well, if you're searching, then I'll just go ahead and ask it now,
yeah.
and then you can find
Yeah,
something
you can.
convincing.
And
So
then
yeah,
there's
one of the fans of your blog, Professor Huemer, was looking for a little bit more insight into why you think that the two-box solution is the more rational or preferable solution. And maybe in your answer, if you could just give like a brief overview of Newcomb's paradox and your approach to it.
Okay. I don't know how brief this will be, though. Okay, so yeah, so if somebody hasn't heard the paradox before, there's there's two boxes in front of you, and one of them has $1,000 in it, which you can clearly see. The other one, so there's like a transparent box which clearly has $1,000 in it, and then there's an opaque box, and you're informed that the opaque box either contains $1 million or nothing. And you're going to be given the choice of whether you want to take only the opaque box or both boxes. Okay, now, so far it sounds like it's obvious that you take both boxes because you want whatever plus $1,000. Okay, but here's an additional bit of information. So there's a machine that predicts human decisions, and basically, just pretend that this is true, that they could scan your brain and then they feed a scenario into the computer, and the computer, using its information about your brain configuration, predicts what decision you would make in the given scenario. And let's say that the machine is 90% reliable. So 90% of the time, if a person gets in the situation, they do the thing that the machine thought that they would do. Okay, and so also, they scanned your brain yesterday, and they had the machine do a prediction of whether you would take one box or two boxes, and they decided what to put in the opaque box based upon that. And so if the machine thought you would take two boxes, then they put nothing in the other box. And if the machine thought you would take only one box, then they put $1 million in the opaque box. So, okay, so now should you take the opaque box only, or should you take both boxes? Okay, so there's an argument that you should take both boxes. The argument is, appeals to what's known as the dominance principle, which is sort of look at each possible state of the world and say, if that was the state of the world, what should I do? And if you get the same answer, no matter what the state of the world is, then do that thing, right? So if there's an action such that you should do that action if the world was in state A, and you should do that action if the world was in state B, and that's true for every state the world could be in, then you should do that action. Okay, so if there's $0 in the opaque box, then you should take both boxes, because then you'll get $1,000 instead of $0. If there's $1 million in the opaque box, you should take both boxes, because then you'll get $1,001,000 instead of $0. Right? So overall, just take both boxes. Okay, and then the other reasoning is appealing to the expected utility maximization principle, which is sort of, you're supposed to take each thing that could result from your action and multiply the probability of getting the result, given that you perform the action, times the value of the result to you. So you're deciding which box to take, and you're supposed to go, okay, so if I take both boxes, there's a 90% probability that the machine will turn out to have correctly predicted that I would do that. And so there's a 90% chance that I will get, there will be nothing in the box. So then I'll only get $1,000. If I take only one box, then there's a 90% chance that the machine will have correctly predicted that. And so then I will get, $1 million. And so the 90% chance of $1 million, that just outweighs the 90% chance of getting, or the guarantee of getting $1,000 plus only a 10% chance of getting $1 million, right? Okay, so it looks like there's an argument that you maximize expected utility by taking only one box. And so the puzzle, as Robert Noze presented it when he first talked about this, was it looks like there's a conflict between two principles for how you're supposed to make rational decisions. Like the dominance principle conflicts with the expected utility principle. Okay, so my view is that you should take both boxes. So the dominance reasoning is correct. usually when people talk about this paradox, like they say, they take one side or the other and they basically just reiterate the reasoning. Like the two boxers in explaining their position, they usually just reiterate the dominance reasoning. And then the one boxer just reiterate the expected utility reasoning. Now, what would count as solving the problem would be to explain how you can get the same answer from both principles. So that's what I tried to do, which I'm not sure that everyone appreciated. Right, so like, okay, so you obviously get the two-box answer from dominance reasoning. And then I try to explain how you can get the two-box answer from expected utility maximization if you do the expected utility calculation in the right way. Right? So my claim is the right way to do the expected utility maximization is you would start by assigning probabilities to each possible state of the part of the outside world that you can't affect. Right? So there's some things that you can change with your actions and there's some things that you can't. Right? So like just assign probabilities to the possible states of the unaffectable by you world. Okay, so there's something that happened yesterday when they put the money in the opaque box or they didn't. And then just like assign a probability to that, right? So say that is probability P that they put the money in the box because you can't affect that, right? And then you should calculate expected utilities conditional on that, right? So like conditional on the assumption that they put the money in the box and then calculate conditional on the assumption that they didn't. And then you should take a probability weighted average of those. Basically, okay. So the correct calculation is, all right, so there's a probability P that there's $1 million in the opaque box. If I take two boxes, then my expected utility is P times 1,000,000 plus 1,000. Okay, if I take only one box, my expected utility is P times 1,000,000. So I get higher expected utility. It's higher by 1,000 if I take both boxes. All right. So yeah, I don't know if that answered the question adequately.
No, I think that did answer it. It actually started a little bit of an argument in our AMA chat. So I'm glad that it seems like people are interested in what you have to say. I also pointed them to your fake news blog post on it, so hopefully they can get some more answers from that. And just as a side question, are you open to people emailing you if they have further questions about this topic or others?
Yeah. I mean, I want to mention also that it's discussed in my book, Paradox Lost, Newcomb's Paradox. So it's discussed a lot more fully there than on my blog.
Sure, I'll link that too for them. And then Pake, if you want to take the reins again.
Yeah, real quick. I have a question about speech and morality. So, Terence Cuneo attempts to transcendentally ground the existence of moral facts in speech act theory. Do you think this view is plausibly defensible?
So like, unfortunately, I have not read this. It doesn't sound promising at first because I kind of think, it sounds like it's going to imply that, like if you don't talk, then ethics doesn't apply to you or something, so that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
So, unfortunately, like I don't have a critique since I haven't read it.
All right, yeah, no problem. So here's another one that I think I've heard you talk about before. What are your views on antinatalism, and do you think it has any ties to veganism?
Yeah, I have thought about the reasons that people usually give for why they think it's wrong to make people, I'm not persuaded by, and they're usually kind of human-centered. But so one thing that I've heard is, when you bring somebody into the world, you do so without their consent, and and like you're imposing a big risk and predictably imposing a lot of harms on them, and you didn't get their consent, so it's wrong, right? Like what if they have a bad life? But also, even if they have a good life, even within a good life, some bad stuff happens to people, and like you just have to get their consent. Like if you want to do something good to someone and also something bad, you have to get their consent, even if the good thing is greater than the bad thing, right? Okay, so that's one thing I've heard. I've also heard from David Benatar thinks that like the bad experiences that people will have in their life count as reasons against creating them. But the good experiences people will have don't count as reasons in favor. And so like it's just always the case that you have more reason to not have a child than to have one. I think that's his view, although I didn't read his book. But this just seems false. Like, okay, so it seems to me like the good experiences that people will have are a reason in favor of creating them. Okay, now this does have the implication that if you can have a child who would be very happy, then you have actually a lot stronger reasons for having a child than most people recognize. But I think that's true.
Gotcha.
Yeah, about the consent thing, I just think like it's reasonable to assume that most people will consent after the fact, so to speak. Like most people after being born, they are going to not mind that they were born. Like after you have the kids, assuming that you treat your kids well, and then you say, "Hey, do you have a problem with the fact that I had you, I brought you into the world?" They're going to say no. So I think this is okay. Like in something like in the way that like if there's an accident victim and they're unconscious and you give them medical treatment, it's okay even though they didn't consent because it's reasonable to think that after you save them, they're going to be glad. Right?
So, yeah, a little thought experiment one of my professors said was like, this would also apply to if, I just punched you in the face and then gave you $1 million.
Yeah.
Right? Like I think anyone in there, they actually did a poll in my class and like 2 people would not have chosen to get punched for $1 million. Very weird. But anyways, most people, I didn't get that. Most people would be very happy that you punched them in the face and gave them.
Depends on who the puncher is, I guess.
Yeah. But yeah, so what would you say about that? Because surely we wouldn't say it's okay to punch someone and give them $1 million just because virtually everyone would prefer to be punched for $1 million, unless you do think that.
So I'm not sure, but I mean, if there's some reason why you can't ask them beforehand, like, and there's some reason why you can't give them the $1 million without punching them, then I would say do it, right? Yeah. So, right, if somehow either asking them or just not doing the punching somehow prevents you from giving them the $1 million, then I would say go ahead and punch them and give them the $1 million. And this is relevant because that is the case when you're having an infant. There's no way of getting their consent, and there's also no way of creating them and not having them ever experience any harm. So, the only way to give them the benefit is to do it in this way.
All right. But if you could ask them, then it would be wrong to do?
Yeah. If you could, yes, like there are these disembodied souls, and if you could ask them, hey, do you want to come into the world? Then I guess you would be obligated to ask them before bringing them in. Yeah.
Right. Gotcha. All right. Fantastic. Well, looks like we're running out of time here. Bryn, did you have a last thing you wanted to say?
No, I think we just have any more questions. Otherwise, if I start, I'm going to get into a deep discussion again. So I'll ask another question that requires like a 5-minute explanation, like the Newcomb one, which we really appreciated it, by the way. I'll let you ask like so many like sort of simple like vegan related questions that might remain.
Simple vegan questions. How do you feel about feeding your pets vegan?
Oh, yeah. I'm not sure. So like I think I need more medical knowledge that I don't have, about whether it could be healthy for the animal. Like I think if there's a viable way of doing it and the animal being healthy, then you should do it. And if not, maybe you should not have the pets. Right? Which, I'm sorry to say because I know that people love their pets, but
All right. Fantastic. Oh, we have one guy who does want to come up real quick. Monster. Monstar. Would you? I'm gonna.
Go ahead.
I think you can come up yourself. Or are you just your staff? Yeah, just get on up here. All right.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. I have a question based on what you said earlier. When you said that you don't know of any good argument for animals to have rights. First of all, do you believe that there is at least one good argument for humans to have rights?
There's not much of an argument. There's just like appeals to intuitions, right? Yeah, right. I mean, like, there's no argument that's not a fairly direct appeal to intuitions. Like, all ethical arguments appeal to intuitions, right? But they're sort of like, okay, and that, so like the argument for humans to have rights depends on stuff like, you give examples where it seems like it's wrong to harm one person, even if it creates a larger benefit for multiple other people. But then if you substitute in animals, I don't find the intuitions as clear. So yeah, is that the whole question?
Okay, yeah, thank you. Also, you said that we humans also have to work in order to have a decent living, and as such, basically it's okay for animals to have to provide some form of work, such as, for example, producing eggs, so long they are treated well. But now considering this, what's your opinion about making baby humans work so long they are treated well, but are not consenting?
Oh, is it okay? I mean, I'm not sure what kind of work they'd be doing. So like, if they're doing painful or unpleasant work, sounds bad.
Let's say performing tricks for social media, for example.
I think that's okay, actually. I don't see the problem, but sometimes they have baby actors, right? Like if a baby appears in a movie, you could say it's working. That's about what a baby can do.
Right.
I don't see the problem if it's not causing pain or suffering. So I know some people wouldn't like it though.
And I have a last question real quick. Do you believe we should refer to animals as it or as them?
Oh, I guess them, right? So because like the important distinction is between beings and just inanimate objects, right? Like that's more important than the distinction between intelligent beings and merely sentient beings.
All right, thank you.
So I know we have run out of time. There's one question I really want to ask, though, if you might be able to stay for another couple minutes. Okay, unless you have to go, which is totally fine.
Yeah. Say it quickly.
All right. So in your paper, Naturalism and the Problem of Moral Knowledge, you criticize primarily those like Sturgeon, Boyd, and O'Brink, who claim that there's a synthetic identity between natural and moral facts, and that our moral reasoning is much more like our current conception of scientific reasoning than people have often thought. You give several criteria that the naturalist theory must satisfy in order to be sufficiently explanatory. How would you respond to someone like Boyd, who has given examples using types of terms he calls homeostatic property clusters, and draws a parity between terms like healthiness and goodness in an attempt to demonstrate the causal and explanatory power of this theory, and which naturalist theories do you think come closest to meeting your conditions?
I mean, so like this is so I haven't looked at Boyd's more recent work. Like I haven't looked at the literature since I wrote that paper, but this was my thought at the time. So like there's a approach where you say, oh, like the concept of good unites multiple different. It unites states of affairs that don't have a unified descriptive property, other than that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how you could have more explanatory power, because like sometimes you can unite a bunch of different things, and those things will produce similar effects. Okay, but anyway, so here's my problem. Like, I think that you could have a perverse moral theory that substitutes bad for good, and then you could have exactly the same explanatory power, right? So, yeah, so like, the reason why Adolf Hitler ordered the final solution is that he was evil. Okay, but imagine somebody who has just totally reversed values from you, and then they could say, well, he ordered the final solution because he was good. And then, and just like everywhere where you say something is explained by goodness, they could say it was explained by badness, and vice versa, right? And so so like scientific explanations are not like that. If somebody thinks water is H2O, you can't substitute, NaCl and just like still explain the same stuff, right?
I see. All right. Well, thanks so much. Don't want to take up too much more of your time. But yeah, thank you so much. If you want to shout out any of your upcoming work or anything, you're more than welcome to. We really appreciate you coming. I had a lot of fun. I hope you did too.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was a great discussion, and thank you for organizing it, Pake.
Yes.
And if anyone wants to see more of my stuff, go to my website, owl232 at owl232.net.